Delegations from Hamas and Israel start indirect talks in Doha. Israel strikes the planning chief of Hamas in northern Lebanon. And Iran reiterates its commitment to a peaceful nuclear program under UN oversight. Delegations from Hamas and Israel have started indirect talks in Doha, mediated by Qatar, to establish a general framework for a potential truce. Qatar's Foreign Ministry spokesman Majid al-Ansari described the discussions as preliminary, aimed at bridging gaps before detailed negotiations begin. He emphasized that the process is ongoing with no fixed timeline and stressed the importance of maintaining confidentiality to prevent harmful leaks. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas has said that she will discuss with Israel a review showing breaches of human rights under their agreement. She said that the move aims to improve humanitarian aid access, not punish Israel. Kallas called for de-escalation amid Gaza evacuations and rising tensions, urging all sides to return to talks. She also announced the EU plans to approve new sanctions on Russia this week. Egypt's Foreign Minister Badr Abdel Ati and High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy Kaja Kallas have discussed regional developments during their phone call. Abdel Ati updated Kallas on Gaza ceasefire negotiations and detainee releases, emphasizing the need for sustained aid. Kallas reiterated the EU's concern for Gaza's humanitarian crisis. They also discussed stabilizing the Israel-Iran ceasefire and resuming Iranian nuclear talks, with a focus on the E3 group's role in de-escalation. Speaking before the British Parliament, French President Emmanuel Macron has underscored the urgent need for a ceasefire in Gaza, asserting that recognizing a Palestinian state is the sole path to regional peace. Macron warned that an endless Gaza war threatens the entire Middle East. Macron declared a commitment to fighting for a ceasefire in Ukraine until the very end. He also urged Paris and London to assert independence from both US and Chinese influence. UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy has stressed the urgent need for a Gaza ceasefire, warning that Britain would take further action against Israel if the situation persists. Lammy affirmed this stance before a parliamentary committee. This follows the UK's May decision to suspend free trade talks with Israel and impose new sanctions on West Bank settlers, reflecting growing discontent over the Gaza conflict and military escalation.
That a Royal Air Force A400 has flown in to Tel Aviv and taken 63 British nationals and their dependents.
The Israeli occupation army has issued a new forced evacuation order for civilians in 9 areas of Qnews, southern Gaza. The military announced plans to expand operations and intensify heavy firepower, urging residents to move westward. Despite declaring certain safe zones like Al-Mawasi and Qnews as evacuation areas, these locations are frequently targeted by Israeli attacks, putting civilians at continued risk. The management of Al-Aqsa Hospital in central Gaza has warned of an imminent fuel shortage that could halt vital medical services within hours. As one of the few functioning hospitals in the area, the shortage threatens patients' care across multiple wards, including kidney dialysis treatments. Hospital officials have urgently called on the international community to pressure Israel to supply adequate fuel to maintain healthcare operations. Similar fuel crises have previously impacted Gaza's Al-Shifa and Al-Nasser hospitals, exacerbating the region's ongoing medical challenges. Egypt's Grand Mufti Nazir Muhammad Ayad has denounced the recent storming of Al-Aqsa Mosque compound by extremist Israeli settlers under heavy occupation force protection. In a strong statement, he condemned these acts as part of systematic Israeli policy aimed at discrediting Islamic sites and violating international law. He stressed the incursions are deliberate steps in a broader colonization plan targeting the sacred site revered by over 2 billion Muslims. The Grand Mufti reaffirmed that Al-Aqsa is an indivisible Islamic right, warning that any intrusion violates fundamental religious principles and Islamic consensus. He urged the international community, human rights groups, and free nations to take swift, effective measures to stop Israel's ongoing violations and protect holy sites. The Zaytun Medical Clinic in Gaza City has shut down due to Israeli shelling threatening the safety of patients and staff. The Palestine Red Crescent Society, PRCS, reported the clinic served thousands, especially displaced residents from eastern Gaza. Its closure means many civilians must now travel long distances for medical care and vaccinations. Since the conflict began, 18 PRCS clinics have been forced to close due to evacuations and military actions. And for more analysis, we now move to Hani Saif in our newsroom. To you, Hani.
Thank you, Hela. Ladies and gentlemen, to comment on the situation in Gaza, we're joined from Cairo by Al-Ahram Weekly Managing Editor, Mr. Khalid Dawood. Mr. Dawood, welcome to Q News. Now, given the preliminary nature and confidentiality of the Doha talks, what are the most significant obstacles to bridging the gaps between Hamas and Israel for a lasting truce?
Well, thanks, Hani, for having me. I mean, again, as most observers and analysts seem to agree, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu remains to be the main obstacle to reaching a real end to the war that's been going on for almost 2 years because of his insistence to place conditions that are very difficult to achieve, topped with his refusal to pull out Israeli troops from the Gaza Strip, or to pledge at this stage of negotiations that any temporary truce would lead to a permanent end to the war itself. Netanyahu, again, since the talks started to reach a permanent truce, starting the era of former U.S. President Biden, has always maintained the same position that he is not going to allow the Hamas to control the Gaza Strip. And at the same time, he also does not want the Palestinian Authority to control the Gaza Strip. And from his perspective, and even during his statements with the U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House yesterday, Israel should, from his point of view, continue to maintain security control over all occupied Palestinian territories, whether Gaza or the West Bank, without any serious prospect for a peace process that would lead to the creation of a Palestinian state.
Yes,
so,
well, sir, how do the ongoing forced evacuations and the intensified military operations in Qnews, coupled with the targeting of safe zones, complicate efforts for de-escalation and humanitarian relief?
There is a very determined plan, Hani, by the Israeli government to forcibly evacuate the Palestinian people and to implement the proposed plan by U.S. President Donald Trump of moving Palestinians to either nearby countries or to any countries who would accept the Palestinian people. And that's a very actually naive and superficial point of view, because the issue in Gaza is not just related to overpopulation or the fact that there are 2 million people instead of a 1.5 million people. The problem is the occupation of Palestinian land, Israel's insistence on tightening control over the Palestinian lives, even after the withdrawal of Israel from Gaza in 2005. It was Israel that maintained total control over the Gaza Strip, turning it into an open prison. So it's again maybe a kind of a way of taking revenge following the October 7 attacks, but it's definitely not the solution to the problem. If not that it will lead to creating far more problems if Palestinians were actually forced to evacuate due to this barbaric military operation that Israel has been conducting, especially after breaching the ceasefire on March 18. So it's very obvious they want to squeeze the Palestinian population, even according to official statements by the Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz, that they want to create a so-called alleged humanitarian zone south of Qnews, close to the border with Egypt, where they want to move all the Palestinian residents of Gaza, where they're going to control the distribution of food. And basically, that's another way of making life totally unbearable for the Palestinian people, to force them to leave the Gaza Strip.
Yes. So would you say this is one of the immediate and long-term consequence of the plan? What are also the consequences of the critical food shortages and clinic closures on Gaza's healthcare system? And what international pressure points are most effective then?
You know, I mean, there are no words. I mean, I think everybody's run out of words to describe how disastrous the situation in Gaza Strip has been. I mean, and even more after the resumption of the military operations more than 3 months ago. I mean, again, after which Israel announced a total closure of the Gaza borders, and then they came up with this, attempt to distribute food through the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, basically a company run by U.S. and Israeli intelligence or former intelligence officials, which turned into basically a death trap for the Palestinians, which actually, Hani, if you think about it, it's a horrible reflection of the miserable life the Palestinians are living. I mean, thousands, head to those few distribution points, 3 only in southern Gaza Strip, to get some food, knowing that every day Israeli troops are going to open fire at them, killing an average 50 to 70 to 100 people. So it tells you how miserable and how unbearable life conditions are inside Gaza, while also adding on top of this policy of starvation, the targeting of hospitals, as you mentioned, the refusal to allow critical medical equipment getting into the Gaza Strip. And let me tell you, I mean, again, Mr. Netanyahu can claim victory as much as he can. He can claim that he's now creating a new Middle East, that he can bomb Iran and do all whatever. But the reality, the ugly reality that he's denying, is that Israel has turned into a pariah state all over the world. I mean, again, there was a recent article in the New York Times quoting opinion polls where, the acceptance of Israel worldwide has deteriorated sharply. In some countries, refusal of Israeli policies has overcome 75%. So yes, you can claim whatever victory you want, but at the end of the day, Benjamin Netanyahu is a suspected war criminal, together with his former defense minister, Yoav Gallant, along with many other top Israeli officials. Israel is live on TV killing hundreds of Palestinians every day, and definitely that's not going to create conditions in which we can restore peace, or Israel can dream about normalizing ties with the Arab world or starting trade with the Arab world. This is massacre in which nearly 60,000 people have been killed, mostly women and children, is not going to be forgotten or forgiven easily, let me say.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Mr. Khalid Dawood from Cairo, Al-Ahram Weekly Managing Editor. Mr. Dawood, thank you very much for joining us here on Q News. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we go back to Hela Al-Hamilawi in our studio. Hela.
Thank you so much, Hani. And resuming our news bulletin, casualties were reported at Al-Shifa Hospital after an Israeli strike on Gaza City as ceasefire talks continue. Gaza's health ministry confirmed deaths and injuries from the strike, with victims rushed to a Shifa hospital. The attack comes as U.S. brokered ceasefire efforts gain momentum following meetings in Washington between President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Israel says it targets Hamas and aims to free detainees while claiming efforts to avoid civilian harm. The latest strike underscores the ongoing toll on Gaza's population amid stalled negotiations. A blast and rising smoke were seen over Gaza as indirect ceasefire talks continue. Israel says 5 soldiers were killed in northern Gaza. The latest strike comes amid ongoing indirect negotiations between Israel and Hamas, supported by the U.S., to secure a Gaza ceasefire and detainees release deal. President Trump met with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu at the White House to push talks forward. Since October 2023, Israel's war has killed over 57,000 Palestinians, with most residents displaced and nearly 500,000 facing famine. Moving on to Lebanon, where Israel struck a key Hamas member, Mahran Mustafa Bajour, the group's planning chief, near Tripoli in northern Lebanon. Lebanese sources, including Lebanon 24 and the national news agency, confirmed a drone attack on a vehicle in the village of Al-Ariyuniya near Tripoli, involving 2 missiles targeting a CRV SUV. And in Yemen, at least 2 crew members of the Greek-operated bulk carrier Eternity Sea were killed in a drone and speedboat attack off Yemen's coast. Liberia's shipping delegation reported to the International Maritime Organization 2 others were also injured. The attack follows a recent strike by Houthis on another Liberian-flagged vessel, Magic Seas, which they claimed sank.
We're trying to make a deal so that there's no destruction and death.
U.S. President Donald Trump has asserted that American bombs precisely struck targets in Iran, claiming all Iranian nuclear facilities were destroyed without hindrance. He labeled the Afghanistan withdrawal embarrassing for the U.S. Trump also announced tariffs beginning August the 1st and expressed discontent with the Russian president's actions. Trump also criticized the U.S.'s disproportionate NATO contributions and suggested imposing severe sanctions on Russia if Putin does not stop. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has stated that Tehran remains open to diplomacy and economic cooperation, despite eroded trust due to an alleged U.S. ally undermining talks. Araghchi reiterated Iran's commitment to a peaceful nuclear program under UN oversight, refuting Israeli claims of preventing weaponization. He warned against misinterpreting Iran's responsible de-escalation efforts as weakness, emphasizing their readiness. Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghai has stated that Tehran has not requested any meeting with U.S. officials to resume nuclear talks. This contradicts earlier remarks by U.S. President Donald Trump and U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff, who indicated an imminent meeting to potentially make peace and lift sanctions. Trump also claimed to have erased Iran's nuclear program through past strikes, while reaffirming his desire to fit sanctions if Iran adopts a peaceful approach. Iranian state television has reported that Tehran believes Israel is planning further attacks with anticipated U.S. backing from U.S. President Donald Trump. This comes as informed Iranian source stated that Israel seeks war and that Iran Trump would oppose it. This comes as U.S. media cited Israeli officials who believe that Trump would approve military action if Iran restores its nuclear program, specifically at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. That comes as Iran views the Trump-Netanyahu meeting as a precursor to potential conflict, not diplomacy. The Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister has revealed that Tehran recently received messages from Washington indicating a desire to resume nuclear negotiations. However, he stated that recent aggressions against Iran's sovereignty have eroded any remaining trust, making negotiations difficult. He emphasized that while diplomacy remains a core principle, America's actions cannot be easily overlooked. Iran's diplomatic apparatus will announce its decision on talks when deemed appropriate by state institutions. The Kremlin said that it needs time to clarify what weapons the U.S. is supplying Ukraine after Trump announced new arms support. President Trump has said that the U.S. would send more defensive weapons to help Ukraine repel Russian advances. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov noted conflicting statements on U.S. arms supplies, but acknowledged continued European deliveries. Russia currently controls nearly a fifth of Ukraine's territory, including Crimea, all of Luhansk, and large parts of other eastern and southern regions as fighting intensifies. The Kremlin called the suicide of ex-Transport Minister Roman Starovoyt shocking after he was dismissed by President Putin. Starovoyt was found dead in his car near Moscow with a gunshot wound on Monday, hours after his removal from office. Investigators say that the main theory is suicide. A presidential decree announced his dismissal without explanation, ending his term after just 1 year. The Kremlin expressed deep shock over the incident, which has sparked questions about internal pressures within Russia's leadership. Canada's Foreign Minister Anita Anand has visited Japan to join the signing of a new security of information agreement between the two countries. Agreed upon at last month's G7 summit in Canada, the pact builds on their existing partnership and enables sharing of classified national security information. Both Anand and her Japanese counterpart Takeshi Iwaya highlighted the agreement's growing importance amid today's challenging global security environment. A man was gored and 6 others injured during San Fermin's second running of the bulls in Pamplona on Tuesday. 6 bulls from the region completed the 875-meter route in just over 5 minutes. Tension rose when one bull broke from the pack and charged at runners, causing panic. Hundreds of participants dressed in white and red raced through Pamplona's narrow streets. Emergency services said that 6 people were hospitalized with light injuries, while the gored man remains under medical care. China's Tianzhou-8 cargo craft detached from its space station on Tuesday and will soon re-enter the atmosphere in a controlled descent. According to the China Manned Space Agency, most parts of Tianzhou-8 will burn up during re-entry, with small debris landing in a designated area. The craft launched in November 2024 atop a Long March 7Y9 rocket and docked at the Tiangong Space Station's core module, Tianhan. About 3 hours later, the mission delivered essential supplies to support ongoing operations aboard China's space station. Legoland Windsor Resort is hosting a life-size Lego replica of the McLaren Mach-E 39 Formula One car from July the 8th until the 15th. The model, driven by British Grand Prix winner Lando Norris and teammate Oscar Piastri, is built from nearly 400,000 Lego bricks, weighs 2,420 kilograms, and took 1,800 hours to complete. Fans can see the detailed replica outside the Lego store, take photos, and explore Lego's F1 collection inside the park. The resort also offers the Ferrari Build and Race experience, where children can build and race their own Lego cars. A fast-moving wildfire fueled by winds up to 70 kilometers per hour forced the closure of Marseille Province Airport, disrupting travel during the busy summer holiday season. The blaze near Le Pen, north of Marseille, covered around 30 hectares. Authorities deployed 168 firefighters along with fire engines and helicopters. Evacuations were ordered in nearby areas due to high winds. Flights were diverted to regional airports, including Nice and Nîmes. Smoke and the smell of the fire were reported across Marseille city. U.S. President Donald Trump has officially delayed imposing higher tariffs on U.S. imports until August the 1st. This move comes just as 90-day pause on some of his administration's import taxes was set to expire this week. President Trump has sent letters to 14 countries, including Japan and South Korea, detailing the levies they face. He renewed his threat of a 25% tax on products from Japan and South Korea, with other nations like Myanmar and Laos facing tariffs as high as 40%. Despite the new deadline, Trump indicated that the rates could be modified, suggesting that he remains open to further trade talks.
But we had no other president that was willing to do this. It's great to have you. Thank you very much.
For his part, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has described U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to impose a 25% tariff on Japan as truly regrettable. Despite this, Ishiba emphasized that bilateral negotiations will continue towards a mutually beneficial deal. Speaking at a tariff task force meeting, Prime Minister Ishiba pledged that the government will not waver in defending national interests in future trade talks and will work to mitigate the impact of the impending tariff hike on Japan's export-oriented economy. And that brings us to the end of our news bulletin, and here is what we have been covering. Delegations from Hamas and Israel start indirect talks in Doha. Israel strikes the planning chief of Hamas in northern Lebanon. And Iran reiterates its commitment to a peaceful nuclear program under UN oversight. And this concludes our news bulletin for this hour. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEG to stay informed. I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for more updates here on Qnews.